There is a stretch of trail in what is now Wyoming where the wagon ruts are still pressed into the earth. Along that corridor, thousands of graves once lined the route, by some estimates 10 to 15 dead for every mile. Many were shallow, unmarked. The companies that followed sometimes drove their wagons directly over them so the ground would stay packed and the dead would not be disturbed. The attacks got the story. The dime novels got the credit. But it was not attacks that emptied those wagons, friend. It was a mistake, the same mistake, made over and over, by families who thought the danger was out ahead of them when it was riding in the wagon with them. Historians estimate that of everyone who died on the overland trails, only a small fraction died in any confrontation. The rest died of things that had nothing to do with a rifle. How those families actually died, what the survivors did differently, and what any of it has to do with you. I am going to walk you through every one of them in the order they took people. Every piece except one. There is one that took more of them than all the rest, and it is the one nobody puts in the movies. We will get there. Stay with me by choice, friend. This is worth the 20 minutes. These were not fools. They were careful people who prepared for the wrong thing. That is the part worth your time, because people still do it. Wagon trains heading west rolled out across a shared road that stretched toward Oregon, California, and Utah. The wagon itself stood at the center of every family's hopes, loaded with food, bedding, and the last reminders of home. It weighed 1.5 tons, iron wheels biting into ruts and rocks, guided by oxen that could bolt at a shout or shadow. The only brakes were a wooden lever or the animal's strength. There were no seat belts, no rails, and no room for error. Most people picture danger coming from outside the circle, but the records tell a different story. Confrontation, whether between immigrants and native people or anyone else, accounted for only a small share of deaths. Historians like John D. Unruh, cited by the Oregon History Project, estimate the numbers, but violence ran both ways, and some routes saw more native lives lost to immigrants than the reverse. More often, native communities traded, guided, or warned travelers, especially at river crossings and tough stretches. The real hazard traveled with the families every mile. A child could slip from the wagon tongue or tumble from the seat, and if that happened, the wheel showed no mercy. In July 1843, 6-year-old Joel Hembry fell beneath his family's wagon. William Thompson Newby wrote the loss in his diary. The boy went under both wheels. He was the first run-over death recorded on the trail, but far from the last. Adults faced the same risk, caught while loading barrels, or crushed when a wagon rolled on a grade, or dragged under if oxen spooked and jerked the load forward. The Oregon-California Trails Association's accident study found wagon runovers were the most common fatal accident on the trail, a danger almost forgotten today. The wagon was the family's home, but the wheel did not know the difference between home and hazard. People trusted the wagon's shelter, believing it safe, but that trust could lower their guard. Familiar things can be the most dangerous, and the wagon carried something else families believed would protect them. Friend, if you picture your great-great-grandfather's wagon, you probably see a rifle hanging close by. Out there, every man wanted to be ready. Trouble is, that sense of readiness could turn on a fellow faster than any stranger on the plains. Most families kept their guns loaded and capped, lying in the wagon bed, close at hand. Not slung over a shoulder, not stored away, right where you could grab it in a hurry, even after dark. John Bidwell wrote about it back in 1841, same year James Shotwell lost his life. It happened after dusk, reaching into the wagon bed for that rifle, pulling it out muzzle first, the gun fired. Shotwell never saw another sunrise. He wasn't the only one. Men got shot by their own hands or by a neighbor's, hunting before daylight or shifting loads at camp. The accidents came from the way those muzzle loaders worked. Heavy, awkward, easy to drop, and always one slip from disaster. Sometimes a cap would jar loose, or a tired hand would fumble. The gun was carried for the danger outside, but the muzzle was pointed at home. That's the part folks miss. The records like those kept by the Oregon-California Trails Association ranked firearms second only to wagon wheels for trail accidents. Not murder, not shootouts, just plain mishandling. Most of those families believed a loaded gun was good insurance, a way to keep their children safe. But a precaution can make its own danger, neighbor. Your great-great-grandfather might have thought he was guarding against the unknown, but the real risk lay right beside him, under the canvas. There's a lesson in that even now. Sometimes the thing you trust to protect you is the thing you should handle slowest. But a gun could be set down. The next danger had to be crossed. Friend, your great-great-grandfather did not cross a dry prairie from Missouri to Oregon. He faced rivers wide as a field and cold as a well, and every one of them had to be crossed with the whole outfit, wagon, oxen, children, and all. The Kansas, the Platte, the Green, the Snake, the Columbia, each one had its own temper, its own price. The North Platte, near Casper, Wyoming, was famous for it. I've read the old diaries and the Wyoming history accounts. Some years, the ferry cost more than a week's food. Some years, the water ran high and brown, and the current pulled hard enough to take a wagon sideways. You picture a ford as a shallow spot, but the river did not have to be deep everywhere. It only had to be deep where the wagon went wrong. Here's how it happened. The team steps in first, hooves slipping on the stones. Livestock bunches up, crowding the lead yoke. A calf panics and breaks loose, pulling a boy off his feet. If that boy couldn't swim, and most folks couldn't, he was gone in a breath. Sometimes a mother tried to hold on to a child or a barrel, lost her footing, and the current rolled her under. The wagon itself could tip if the wheels dropped into a hole or if the oxen lost the line. I've seen the numbers, hundreds lost this way, though the exact count is lost to the mud. There were ferries, but those charged steep tolls. Some families waited days for the water to drop, letting others go ahead. That was not idleness or cowardice, neighbor. That was a choice to keep the family together, to keep the oxen from breaking, to keep a child from being swept away. Still, the pressure was real. Daylight was precious. Company rules said, keep moving. If you waited too long, you risked being left behind, but if you rushed, you might not make it at all. The lesson is plain, even now. Waiting can be the bravest thing a person does when the world is pushing you to hurry. That river crossing was a test of patience, not just strength. And waiting at a river was not the only kind of delay that could turn costly. Neighbor, you hear a lot about the famous disasters, but the real trouble with the Oregon Trail started before a wagon wheel ever touched prairie grass. Most families, your great-great-grandfathers among them, sat at the kitchen table and tried to pick a day. The guidebook said late April or early May, but grass was still short and oxen needed to eat before they could walk. If you left too soon, the team might starve by the first river. If you waited, the Rockies would be waiting with snow. That window was narrow, and every year it changed, sometimes by a week, sometimes by two. Lansford Hastings and Elijah White wrote their advice in the 1840s, but the weather didn't read their books. A 2-week delay at home didn't just mean 2 weeks late to Oregon. It meant 2 weeks less grass, 2 weeks closer to mountain snow, 2 weeks less rest for the stock. On the trail, 2 weeks was not a delay. It was a change in the country. I've read the old records, friend. A family would get stuck at home, waiting on seed to sprout, a neighbor's help, a wagon repair, or a last calf born late. They'd say, we'll make up the time on the road. But the trail didn't care about intentions. Every day lost in spring meant harder travel later, when the grass was thin, the water low, and the mountain passes cold. Early snow could close the South Pass by September. Exhausted oxen could give out before the last ridge. It wasn't just a matter of days, it was a matter of survival. Those decisions made sense from the porch, but the prairie and the mountains played by their own rules. The real mistake was thinking you could set the calendar from home without knowing what the grass or the weather would be 1,000 miles ahead. That's a lesson for today too. A deadline can hide the reasons it was set. But even a family that left on time could ask the road to carry too much. Friend, if you walk that old trail now, you'll spot the ruts lined with iron stoves, trunks, broken chairs, and tools rusted into the grass. That's the sign of a family's hopes worn down to the axle. Most folks started out with what they thought they'd need for a new life. Barrels of flour, bedding, a plow, even a sewing machine if they could manage it. The Bureau of Land Management and the old guides both say a wagon team could handle about 2,000 pounds, give or take,
but the truth is every family loaded what they thought was necessary. Some wagons rolled out closer to 3,000, and the oxen bent their necks and pulled until they couldn't. A strong ox team could drag a heavy load on good grass, but the prairie was long and the summer was short. Too much weight, and the animals slowed, ribs showing, tongues out, hooves cracked. When the team weakened, families had to strip the wagon, first the luxuries, then the tools, then even the stove. Sometimes they left a chest full of books or a cradle right there beside the trail because the oxen could not pull another mile. There's a story in those piles, neighbor. Every extra pound began as a promise and ended as a question. If the team failed outright, a family might be stranded, forced to beg a neighbor for help or split up, children riding with strangers, parents walking behind. Sometimes the only choice was to turn back or wait for rescue that never came. That's not a lesson you'll find in the school books. The mistake was thinking you could bring the whole farm to Oregon, that what protected you at home would carry you safe across the plains. Hastings and White wrote their advice in the 1840s, but the trail answered back with ruined wagons and dead oxen. The modern lesson is plain. What shields you in one place can weigh you down in another. Those abandoned goods marked the end of one burden. The next was harder to see, and it waited everywhere. Water ran slow. Everything so far a careful family could see coming. What comes next they could not see at all, and it took more of them than the wagon, the gun, the river, the calendar, and the load put together. Stay with me. Friend, your great-great-grandfather could watch the wheel, the riverbank, the weather, the oxen's ribs, but he could not see what was in the water. As we learned in the previous episode on water, a river is never just scenery on a trail. Here the question is what the water carried. Cholera was the name most feared on the Platte Road, especially in the years from 1849 to 1852. The National Park Service calls it the trail's epidemic. It struck so fast that a person could be well at breakfast, then sick and buried before sundown. Rachel Pattison's people wrote it plain. She was stricken in the morning and gone by night, her grave marked at Ash Hollow. The same story plays out again and again in diaries and old cemetery stones. The way cholera worked was cruel and simple. It came from water and food fouled by waste, human or animal, sometimes just upstream, sometimes left by the last company to pass. A camp would stop at a spring or a ford, draw water for cooking, washing, and the oxen. No one thought that the clear bucket held anything but water. But the bacteria that caused cholera, carried in feces, needed no invitation. Once inside, they emptied a person's body of water in hours. Vomiting, diarrhea, cramps so severe that a strong man could not stand. With no way to replace what was lost, the body shut down. There was no real treatment, no rehydration, no medicine that worked on the trail, just hope, and a shallow grave if hope failed. In those peak years, the Platte corridor became a rolling chain of infection. Each wagon company followed the one before, using the same fords, springs, and riverbanks for their needs. The more crowded the season, the more likely that someone ahead had been sick, and the water had carried it forward. Army doctors at Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie kept notes about foul springs and the need to boil water, but most families lacked the fuel or the habit. The best advice, wait a day or two after another company had camped, boil every drop, keep waste away from water, was easier said than done when the grass was thin and the days short. Germ theory was still a mystery. Folks blamed night air, bad diet, exhaustion, or just the will of God. They watched the ridge line. It came up the river. The danger was not a stranger on horseback or a shadow behind the sage. It was already in the bucket, and it traveled with the wagon, not against it. Estimates vary, but historians agree that disease, above all cholera, killed more families on the trail than all accidents and all violence combined. The grave by the rut, friend, does not tell its own story. Some were lost to the wheel, some to the river, some to the rifle, some to the snow, some to the oxen's last mile, but most, by every count that survives, to water that looks safe. By the time the danger was visible, the grave beside the rut had already become part of the trail.
Neighbor, those graves by the trail aren't just history. They're a lesson about risk and what it means to be careful. Your great-great-grandfather's journey reminds us, most families plan for the wrong trouble, If you want to know what it cost your people, check the county ledgers, church registers, or the family Bible. Tell me down below, did your people come west? Do you know how they got here or what it cost them? The story that gets the most comments is the one I go deep on next. Next time we'll look at the tools that built a home from nothing. Keep the old ways.